Hi there, I'm Linda Hanshaw. I'd like to welcome you to the Introduction to Regenerative Agriculture. I want to start by just talking about the diversity of soil. If there's any headline that I would give you about this topic, it's that while it has been around a number of years and there are a number of people who've been practicing it for many years, it hasn't been widely adopted. I'm going to go into some of the reasons why as we go forward, but I can guarantee you that there is definitely anecdotal and scientific data that points to the fact that these processes are much better than what we've been doing, and that they grow wonderful, healthy, nutritious food that now is not depleting the soil, but is building a sustainable farm, a profitable farm. So there's just lots of really good news here. It's just amazing. People aren't jumping in all over the place, but we'll talk about some of the reasons why that might be true. I want to pay tribute to three farmers. I've met a lot of farmers this year going around the country and talking to people about this topic. It became a really specific area of interest probably about 2 years ago. And as we look at some of the building issues that are affecting our land and our farms, I just kept digging in and meeting more people and talking more about the topic. I'm going to talk about Mark and Kenna Guthridge. They're located in my home state of Colorado, in Longmont, and they own a farm called Olin Farm. It's really a neat name, carefully chosen name. It's an Aztec word that means constant motion or transition. Maybe there's a metaphor here for everything we're going to talk about today, that in order to continue to develop, to become more intelligent, to adapt to changing things and environments, maybe we have to stay in constant motion and transition. And unfortunately, some of our human nature often wants us to not change. It's just easier. It's a little scary. We tend to push back at risk. So these folks came in. They inherited a farm, I think from Mark's grandmother, if I remember correctly. And they did a lot of study. He was in hydrology, she an educator. And they did their research and decided that they wanted to start off with bionutrient farming. You might think of it as organic farming, high nutritious quality foods, and to get that right and develop their farm. Now that isn't an event, that's a process. You start with the land that you inherit, you start with the geography, you start with the weather, and you go forward. And you need to, in regenerative, there's no playbook. You basically using all the resources you can find, and we hope to build a lot more and make this a lot easier for farmers. You go through a trial and error process to see, what works. You make some educated guesses. Some of them work, some don't. I remember listening it was an evening fundraiser at the farm, which I thought was a neat way. They invite people for dinners at their farm, the community, in groups, so they can experience the farm environment, hear some things and learn some things about the farm, and just generally chat with the family members who can tell you a whole lot about this process. But he talked about losing he had put so much time and effort, and he and his family, into developing the farm, and then 2 years in a row getting wiped out by what he called the Great White Plow. And what is the Great White Plow? He's talking about hail. So we're seeing changing weather events. We're seeing heavier rains. We're seeing all kinds of things going on. And one of the things you'll learn today is that both for your garden or your farm, or for just our public lands, there are things we can do to better protect them for upcoming risks. So I really like that they have community-supported agriculture, so people can come and sort of on a subscription basis get really great healthy food from the farm. Very impressed, very distinctive is that they do youth farming classes. So they bring young folks onto the farm. They help with the plantings. They do workshops and camps. And what's really cool too is Kenna, with her educational background and being bilingual, she speaks Spanish. And so, and I don't know if Mark may too, but so what you have here are folks that are, they're doing these classes to diverse cultures in different languages. Really, really impressive. They're active in their community, and I just want to say thank you to them for all that they do. They're not all the way through the process yet, so one of the reasons I included them as a resource for you to go to. Go to their website, Olind Farm. They have Facebook pages. They're in LinkedIn. All of the folks I'm going to mention are. But I wanted to give you a variety of examples of people that have done different things and who I think are, at the forefront of their game. Charlotte Haynes, she's been farming for about 25 years, if I got that right. So she had to be one of the original people that started these processes and had the foresight to say, I want to do something that's really good for the land, that's going to be sustainable. I want to advocate for sustainable management of our natural resources. And so she was at the forefront way back when that was really unpopular, and you're super susceptible to being ostracized by the people around you in the farming community. She's also of note on the board of directors for Rachel's Network. It's a women's alliance that is at the intersection of philanthropy, conservation, and women's leadership. She's also out in her community providing food to the underserved. I mean, this woman is really a powerhouse. I encourage you to go to the website for River Ridge Farm and to check out what they're doing, to hear her own personal story about what motivated her to become someone who was going to protect the land going forward. They grow berries, they grow cattle. And then Seth Watkins, I think I met him in August out in Tennessee. His farm is actually Pinhook Farm in Clarinda, Iowa. This guy gets the big picture, as do all of these folks. He's smart, principled, taking a lead in advocating and developing regenerative agriculture. He had a horrible catalyst during a terrible winter storm and realized that he really needed to follow his gut, and he needed to make sure that he was doing what seemed right and seemed appropriate in tending to his land. So he shifted from he's a fourth generation farmer. He shifted from what he was taught. I'm not saying they were bad or bad people. We've just learned, and we're changing and responding to changing information. But basically he shifted 180 from taking from the land, looking at yield and profit, to giving to the land, growing soil, giving back, making sure that it was sustainable as the priority. And funny thing, everything else fell into line. And he now has a profitable farm, healthy soil, and he's producing healthy food, which is really impressive because as we move and grow in our national population as well as the worldwide population, which I'll show you some of those numbers in a minute, you're going to see that we really need people at the forefront of this topic. So these courageous men and women went through significant pressure. I remember Seth telling me the story about being called to, I think it was like a farm board. They didn't care. They'd want to hear what he was doing, what he'd learned, what was happening with his soil. They just wanted to say, knock it off. They really weren't tolerant to any change, and they weren't interested in discussing it. So I want to thank them for their leadership, for their hardship, their tenacity, and their stewardship of the land, their contribution to regenerative farming. All of them are out there active and advocating. And I want to thank them for the healthy food they produce and their loving care of the land. I want to thank them for being farmers. Regenerative agriculture. What is it? Well, it's a system for restoring degraded land by restoring soil health, by building carbon content. It increases organic matter, fertility, texture, and water retention. It focuses on soil as an ecosystem. And as I travel through the various topics that I am studying and reporting on, if there's any headline, it would be that we have perhaps lost track of ecosystems and looking at the big picture as we take care of our land, our air, our water. And because if you have a disconnect in one area that goes out of whack, it starts spiraling and becoming a feedback system that's very difficult to correct. We're seeing a lot of that today with our climate, as I'm sure you know. So the principles discussed in this presentation can be applied to home gardening, community gardens, farms, large agricultural operations. All of you can benefit by incorporating these principles. We know that our crop yields are going down. We know that our nutrition is going down commensurate with yields. We know that the feedback loop of adding in more fertilizer is just contributing and polluting toxic elements into our environment and causing disease. There's a school of thought, I don't know how scientific it is as yet, but there's a school of thought that one of the reasons we're seeing the obesity that we're seeing is because we're eating so many empty calories. Some of that's by choice, so that's on us, but some of it is that when we go to get food, we don't understand that it's lacking so much in nutritional content. So let's go back to science class and photosynthesis. Just really quickly, I want to remind you that plants and vegetation bring in sunlight, carbon dioxide, and they exhale oxygen, which we breathe, some sugars. When this process is going really well, there's excess carbon and it's moved down the roots into the soil. Carbon's, when you see black soil, rich, black, wet soil, it's probably full of carbon. And that's what we're looking for. We call it soil organic carbon. So healthy soil greatly improves water filtration and retention. It's so significant and essential. When you look at some of the displaced populations around the world, there are lots of factors, but a huge one is you see a population that is not getting enough food or can't find food or can't find water, and they have to get on the move. You find political unrest will follow, and you have significant things that outbreaks of war, terrible, terrible, destructive, harmful death events, those kinds of things. So we can be on top of this. It seems really simple, but it is. The soil's at the basis of all of this. Soil, if it's healthy, won't erode like unhealthy soil does. Water depletion cost and soil erosion in the United States alone is $37 billion annually and $400 billion around the world. So when we look at where can we get money to fund some of the things that we need to fund, let's just take a hard look at the practices and let's avoid the issues that are costly and yet not benefiting us. Regenerative farmers will tell you that as they transition through this to get to really healthy soil, when they get there, they are able to go without toxic chemicals and additives. The healthier the soil, the more organic carbon content and the more nutritious the food. It just is the way it works. Soil depletion has been huge over the last 30 to 50 years. And in an effort to breed new variety of crops, to have them grow faster, to have bigger, the bigger tomato, well, great, we get a bigger tomato, but it's lacking tremendously in nutrients, particularly minerals, by the way. So there have been studies that looked at 43 different vegetables and fruits, from the period of 1950 to 1999, how it started and where the nutrition was at the end of that. And it's showing huge declines in nutritional value. Our population today is about 7.5 billion. The estimates for 2050, just about 30 years away, are 9.2 billion inhabitants on the planet. So we need to prepare for a thirsty and hungry world. And when you look at regenerative agriculture, it addresses two of the huge issues. Healthy soil is more resilient to warming, downpours, and droughts. I'm going to go into a little more why. Here's a picture of some really neat, healthy soil. I guess I'm a real nerd because I think this is really great. Look at those worms, and you'll see other kinds of bugs in the soil. They're addressing issues of compaction because they're moving through it. There's lots of things that you can't see. You could only see in a microscope in terms of fungus and bacteria and really great things that are beneficial and good. If you think about how many are just our grasslands across the planet, 40% of the world's land mass is grasslands. If we can get grassland soil where it is healthier through methods that I will show you, through fertilization with manure, through stimulation of cattle traffic, through it can hold more water. it's going to be less vulnerable, and there's a huge, huge benefit. So what are traditional farming methods, and how can you tell the difference? Tillage is one huge sign. Tillage was thought to control weeds. This is a very, very old farming method. We started with the horse, and the plow, and then we got fancy with industrialization, and we hooked it up to a tractor. And now we go back and forth across those fields, just consuming huge amounts of fossil fuel to run the tractor. We incorporate crop residue. Usually, let's say if you're a gardener, this'll be something that's important to know. Instead of raking up all the leaves and debris off of your yard, it's now thought to be much more beneficial to use that, compost that, or use it on the top of soil to protect the soil during periods where that's beneficial. But it was always thought to plow it under. That disturbed the soil, turned the soil, exposed the soil. And soil that is where you use tillage like this, it's vulnerable. You can just see it when you look at it, that it can heat up more quickly as we have temperatures rise. It can blow away. It can erode away with rainwater even, let alone the droughts and water bombs that we're seeing. So tillage is depleting, and you can see that scientifically in the soil samples that have been taken. Bare soil is parched by the sun, blown away by the wind, and washed away by water more easily. CO2 is also released at that same time, and that's, boy, the topic of the day, isn't it? And it destroys our ecosystem of the soil as this tillage occurs, and it breaks it up and breaks it apart and doesn't recognize it as a complete ecosystem. So it's just very destructive. As that goes on and as the humus is destroyed, farmers will use more inputs because they've got to address what's lacking in the soil and get it to where it'll bring some yield back, because that's how they make their living. And it becomes pernicious, more fertilizer, more pesticide, herbicide, fungicide, and the cost going up. So what's happened is, it used to be that a farmer could actually be profitable, but when we industrialized the process, then they needed the best equipment, they needed to cover more acreage, they were getting a return of less on per bushel, for example, on their crops. And it just started this feedback loop of everybody getting involved and making money, fertilizer people and tractor people and fungicide people and etc., with their own interests in mind. And the farmer at the receiving end of it was losing, and their soil was getting worse and worse, so they had to buy more and more. Sounds like an addiction, doesn't it? So in the last 50 years, there's been a 30 to 50% loss in soil organic carbon in general. So here you can see that we have 389 million acres of cropland in the US. Only 95 million are no-till. So we have a huge potential for conversion to better agricultural processes. Regenerative agriculture limits disturbance. That's a tenet. It limits physical, mechanical, chemical. Again, this applies to your garden. It applies to major croplands that are being grown to produce feed corn, for example, by major corporations, and it applies to the average small farm. Fertilizers, creating horrible toxic algae blooms across the nation. You've probably seen it in your news. I know in my local area, they're saying, keep your dogs away. Dogs are dying because they're drinking the water. We've seen it out in the Gulf, because what happens is the farm water runs into the local stream, runs into the local river, out and pollutes where major feeders are of rivers in our oceans. They're called dead zones. They're algae blooms. Heat and the chemicals are a double whammy. What happens, you get these algae blooms get going, the algae consumes the oxygen, then the other life cannot survive, either dies or departs. So huge dead zones. Research indicates that traditional farmers have year over year applied more fertilizer and more other inputs, they're called, the sides, the killers, the pesticides, herbicides, fungicides, and all of those are running into our water systems, and there's a lot of health problems related to it as well. Ancillary to that, 5% of the natural gas production is to actually produce these horrible things. So lots of people in the money chain, I want you to call your attention to that. People, when they're in the money chain, don't tend to want to advise you about alternatives, even though they may be in your best interest or for your health, for sustainability of the land. They're profit oriented, and they'll stick to the tune. Tobacco industry was a famous one and still is, telling us, you know, that it wasn't cancer causing, and totally deceit for many, many years. We're seeing that in other big topics, and that's why you see them spend so much money on advertisements. By the way, they are not obligated to tell you anything truthful in many of those ads. I'm thinking of big oil, for example. I think it's just so clear right now that we have a problem, and if people are truly interested in the survival of the planet and the health of the planet and future generations, it's just so easy, quite frankly, for, with their big money, to transition to more healthful and still profitable businesses like solar, wind. And by the way, those are the #1 jobs that are at the forefront right now in the United States, are jobs in solar and wind, fastest growing. So toxic algae bloom is what it looks like, pretty ugly stuff. And a regenerative farmer will tell you that over time, they are able to wean off of these things as soon as they can get the soil healthy and they can get the diversity going back in terms of the ecosystem. We'll talk more about that. Cover cropping is one example of, or tenet, I'm going to say, of regenerative agriculture. It prevents evaporation of moisture. And the cool thing is you can just look at these things and say, oh yeah, it makes sense. It prevents weeds because there's no place for them to grow, or is not as much a place for them to grow. And then there are techniques with rotation of different crops and things where they kind of stay ahead of and don't let damaging things establish in the way that we do today. Here's what it might look like. This, for example, you say, well, what am I looking at? Well, this is what they call residue. So after they harvest, this is what's left on top of the ground now, and considered a good thing in many cases. And in some crops, they'll actually plant right through that. Now, how do they do that with a non-tillage method? They actually drill the seed, poke the seed in right among, whether it's the cover crop or the residue. And there's a recipe for that, and there's some crops that like it and some that don't, and they learn to mix and match to make the whole thing work. Regenerative agriculture, with its intercropping, is about growing multiple types of crops in proximity to each other. Trap crops, for example, are intentionally there to attract insects from one crop to another. So you might, a gardener in vegetable gardening, you might put a trap crop row to keep things healthy in your other rows. Nurse crops mix radish seeds with parsnips and carrot seeds, for example. The radish germinate quickly, and they break the topsoil in a way that the others have difficulty doing. So they plow the way through, they plow a path, if you will. And they also attract some insects from the parsnips, for example, the radishes do. So it's really a cool thing. It increases yield, reduces weeds, improves soil health, and reduces cost. Here's an example. Notice the diversity of leaf type. Notice the diversity of height, flowering, non-flowering, perennial, annual. So crop rotation, they know now, mix it up. So it's a defense against disease, but you don't leave it fallow, you don't leave it uncovered. They might follow one type of crop with another that if they're having trouble with a certain disease or insect, they'll plant something that doesn't normally have a problem with that same disease or insect. And so they move on. It establishes somewhere else and isn't attracted to the new planting. And by changing and keeping that moving, they try to stay ahead of these issues without using the chemical inputs. Root length is an important variety because deeper roots help to draw up for shallower roots in terms of nutrients in the proximity of the soil ecosystem. Flowering or not can attract beneficial insects that can support and protect. Regenerative farmers might rotate 8, 9 different types of crops: wheat, sunflower, barley, oats, peas, sometimes together. So sometimes it's rotation in sequence to keep roots in the soil longer during the year, and sometimes it's rotation because they're smartly identifying an issue that they want to avoid, and they rotate the crop to stay ahead of that issue. It creates insurance and diversification, and that all creates a better outcome for the farmer in terms of a protection should there be one kind of loss. Perennials are really important because those are roots in the ground more of the year, the cover cropping concept that you never leave the soil bare or for very short periods of time. Non-destructively harvested perennials, and there are types of plants you can read about, and we'll have other webinars on this, are actually suitable for no-till. So perennials, for example, that produce fruits and nuts that where you're non-destructively harvesting are really, really great choices. Also, diversity wins out again in grazing animals, different manures, different attraction to what they'll graze on. All those things become really great. And by the way, when we do this, we can cut down on the huge, vast amounts of acreage that we dedicate to feed corn and other feed products for the animals by incorporating them right on the farm and using them as part of the diversity and rotation to make a healthier farm. So fibrous or not, whether we provide windbreaks through tree intercropping, that's another technique that's used, can reduce erosion, can provide a habitat for beneficial birds and insects. It increases carbon content. Here's an example. So the look and feel of what we used to think of as the prototypical farm is now changing, and we hope it'll change even more, and more of them will look like that. So there's also a concept called managed grazing, and I want to just talk about the elephant in the room. Now, obviously, there are some concerns about methane from certain types of grazing animals and their digestion. There are concerns about condensation of manure in one area. So we're not talking about a feedlot concept here. We're talking about managed grazing, free range sort of grazing where they're in large pastures, they're moved often, it's more of a natural process. And to get the process right, they are having to watch the net carbon increase in the soil and sequestration. And clearly we've got to make sure that that is as good or better, hopefully better, than what we're doing today in terms of the net emissions. So things that are looked at and managed are how many animals, the variety of the animals. Sheep and cattle might be combined together. You might have guard dogs protecting the group. They come together to protect against predators. The guard dog's there to help it out in the center. And they're moved often. They just graze a little bit, not too much. So you can overgraze or undergraze. It's all about managing how much. So how much time in a limited area. It's set to stimulate the growth of the plant when it's grazed, if it's just enough, not too much. Also, the compaction of the soil, it's stimulated just enough, but they're not there so long like in a feedlot where it just becomes rock hard, full of manure, polluted water. Now you need to bring in the antibiotics, really bad. So you also produce healthier, nutritious food. The animals live a healthier life. It's more humane. So one of the founders of this process way back when, the Alan Savory, you can research this, you can see information about the Savory Institute in Boulder, Colorado. You can also research the African Center for Holistic Management in Zimbabwe. But what he's famous for is he, much like Darwin, I think, just actually observed nature and observed patterns and spotted things that worked in nature and came up with a decision-making framework for land stewardship and restoration. So all of his studies led to knowing about the nibbling and how much, the dunging and how much, I love that word, and trampling and how much, the bunching up and how much, and how that contributes and stimulates to the biological processes. So he studied this most of his life and also created these institutes. There are lots of students, there's lots of replication of this, but really impressive in Zimbabwe to take a look at his land, or the foundation land, better said, as compared to surrounding, just through the changing of the techniques. And it almost, you almost want to cry that we don't just roll this out and do it in so many places to address food scarcity, water scarcity, those kinds of things. So the area needs more study. Some of it is anecdotal. Some of it are, kind of private recipes that came from grandma and the success. And we don't exactly which parts of the recipe were essential, which parts were a little bit of, just happened to be going on concurrent with it. But that's something that I'll talk to you about at the end of this presentation. We need to support these farmers in many ways. Here, very healthy situation. They've got the electric fence around with the cattle and also sheep, guard dog there. Now they'll probably move them through a gate to another similar area and let this area rest after they've managed, looked at it, and determined that they've been there long enough. Some people even have moving fences. They actually move the fences, the cattle and sheep move within them. Sometimes there are pigs used. Sometimes there's one farmer that he puts cages out, huge cages, within which are chickens and that kind of thing, and their manure is being moved across the pasture as they move these huge on wheels rolling cages to fertilize the field. Silvopasture is a huge and significant topic in this area. It talks about trees, clustered or spread, used as fencing or not. And it sequesters carbon both above ground. You've got this perennial that's got roots in the ground, and you want that as much of the year as possible. And you have the biomass on the top that is sequestering carbon, and also then in the soil. So you're really checking all the boxes. It has the potential for 1.1 billion acres worldwide. Hugely significant and amazing that we aren't already moving on this. One of the reasons that regenerative agriculture is attractive as a carbon sequestration solution is not that it is the biggest thing going. It is not the silver bullet. It is not the singular solution or so massive that we should sit back and relax and say, don't keep up the quest. It is, agriculture and forestry combined are, somewhere just below 30% of the overall, atmospheric problem. When you have people wiping out entire forests for palm oil, and by the way, learn about palm oil and learn about all the, I think there's 30 some names for palm oil. It's in anything that pretty much foams. It's anything that feels kind of silicon-like or slippery, and it's in everything from hair products to food products to crackers. And if we keep voting and choosing the people that are using that and ripping down forests to create it, shame on us, because we're part and parcel to the destroying. By the way, there are some people that think if you rip out a tree and you replace another one, that one equals the other, and that's an equal process and fair trade for ripping out a forest. Just not true. We'll have more webinars on this topic, but when you take down a tree, let alone a forest, huge amount of destruction of many things, huge releases of carbon, methane, all kinds of things. I'll teach you more about that, but be wary, be a informed consumer, check out palm oil. So here, studies indicate that these pastures are 3 times as organic in terms of the organic matter in the soil as compared to just say an open field. You have the cattle, the manure from the cattle, they're eating, they're getting nutritious food, they've got the cover crop, you've got a tree, and sometimes if you add a tree that is producing food that the cattle can eat, now you've got all the boxes checked. It's called fodder, by the way, and really, really impressive use of land. It's incredibly great for areas that are not flat or as easy to farm, and we have a lot of it. And there's the incorporation of what are called wild or strips. And these are areas, again, that traditionally haven't been maybe utilized, or techniques that haven't been utilized that are incredibly powerful. You can control water flow across land to make it less destructive, or to make sure it doesn't leave the land in the way that it typically does. You can reduce phosphorus loss by, you can have filtering and reduction of sediment loss. You can use the area for beneficial insects that are pollinating and so important to the whole plant process. You can provide habitat for wildlife. Again, these animals are eating, grazing, stimulating. They're becoming food for other things. It's all a normal, natural process. The water capture, you look at Seth's farm, check out his website, and see what he's done with some of the water capturing techniques. Really, really impressive. So he starts with already pretty clean water because he's got a pretty clean technique in terms of not having very many inputs, if any. But then he filters, and captures and retains. By the time the little bit of water that leaves his property goes into the local stream, and enters into the river and goes out to the ocean, he's contributing really good, healthy, clean water. And you can tell, just look at that video, he's really proud of that contribution to the planet. All of this provides sequestration of carbon, and that's a huge topic and very important. If you only change to produce really nutritious food, that would be an incredible contribution to the world. If you only change to take out some of these toxic inputs, that would be an incredible contribution to the world, significantly improving our environment. But now you add the sequestration of carbon and carbon-rich soil, and it's just amazingly beneficial. Here you see a pollinator strip planted between a crop here. So there's a book called Drawdown I want to call your attention to, and it's got a website, Drawdown, like draw down the carbon from the atmosphere, carbon dioxide problem. And what you will find is in that book, this huge group of very, very talented specialists looked at their individual areas and looked at how they could contribute to carbon sequestration, retention, also projects to just not produce pollutants and those kinds of things that are going into our atmosphere. And they rated them on their ability to solve the issues that we're confronting today and reduce the needed amount of CO2 from the atmosphere. By 2050, they've calculated can remove the techniques that I've discussed today, 71.54 gigatons, if fully implemented. And then the really neat thing is it saves $2.7 trillion. Trillion dollars. I heard a speech by someone who's very knowledgeable in this field, and they were talking about fair transition from if we have to shut down, say, a big oil process like a coal plant, that we should be mindful and supportive of the fact that that wasn't that worker's fault, and that as a whole society, we can absorb the cost of transitioning them and helping them to get reemployed in an area they love, where they live, by the way. Don't expect these people to just leave everything. That's not fair transition. And so a lot of these folks you can bring in to their own area, solar projects in businesses, wind projects in businesses, and many, many other types of things that are healthier and part of solving this process. The book Drawdown will give you some insight into many, many of those topics. Go to the website. It's just as informative. And please be mindful that one estimate said that, with $1.3 billion, I believe, that we could fair transition all of big oil into other positions, so that, it became something that we're taking care of our own people here and making sure that they don't suffer from what we've all been contributing to. We've been buying the energy, so maybe just something to think about. So what are incentives for regenerative agriculture? Clearly, higher net profit. Those inputs cost a lot of money. And if you talk to farmers who have converted, they will tell you that their profit comes from the reduction of input costs. There'll be better water retention, so they're paying less to have to deal with that topic. The filtration, good healthy water, disease prevention, that's a societal cost really, and individual cost that could be preventive, and is just really, really unfortunate. Reduced emissions, farmers are seeing, like, their farm might start out with, and I showed you those soil samples and the variety of them. Keep in mind, I was at one farm this summer where they had, I believe it was 7 or 8 different soil types, and the land had different types. So it's almost like now you need an architect, if you will, of the land that knows soil and knows agriculture to come in and help you to plan out and sequence the variety, diversity, and rotation of things. But all of this can grow that carbon, that organic carbon in the soil. So folks are starting with 1 to 2%, say, and they're going to 5 to 8%. Now, that takes about 10 years sometimes on average. So I'm told these are average figures, but each 1% of growth represents 8.5 tons of organic matter being sequestered per acre. So really, really worth doing. The reduction in environmental pollution, I mean air, water, and land, is currently, it's costing us $157 billion in health and environmental damage. So this is definitely a process, not an event. 4 to 7 years kind of on average from the day you say, I want to do it, to when you have gotten to where you're substantially over the hump and in the new process. There are economic risks whenever you make a transition. Farm-specific requirements, I can't say that enough. So there's no cookie-cutter approach, and one of the ways that we can really help is to divert money for research for professionals in this field. We need to reduce the trial and error process. And it's not like you can roll it out across the nation. Again, I want to just really emphasize it's farm specific, very regionally specific, very different for arid land versus very humid land. There are upfront costs associated with this because you need the help to shorten the timeline. So while you're not investing, you're still investing a little for a period of time in some of the inputs, and yet you need to have people come and help you to design the conversion. Otherwise, the trial and error process can become quite painful. Talk to a farmer. Go meet a farmer in your area who's doing regenerative farming and hear their story. Or there are many, many great books on the topic. There are unique financial and insurance needs. Whenever we do something new and different and we're looking for financial support or to insure it, there's an issue that relates to the people that need to support you and insure you don't even know what you're talking about. So we need educational programs, we need promotional programs where, let's say if somebody's located in Clarinda, that in that regional area that they can go to financial people that are knowledgeable about this, that they can go to insurers who understand that it's okay that not running a bunch of pesticide across the field, and it still should be insured because it's healthier and it's going to actually prevent more damage. They need to learn about those issues. They need to learn how to file for the government programs that can benefit them. So what's needed to overcome this? Change is really hard on people, so that's probably the biggest one. People want to stick to what they've been doing. It's kind of, yeah, we're traditional farmers, we're till farmers. It's the way it's been done for 4 generations. And so just getting those folks to open their minds up and look and assess and see if it might work, or to make sure that when they do give it a try, that it is a knowledgeable, well managed try, so that they come out the gate with a success. These are all really important things. The conversation is number one. Conversation with just about everybody we know to talk about the topic and start talking about the solutions and get people interested in great, nutritious food, in saving our farmland and supporting our farmers. It's a shift in financial incentives and risks, there's no doubt about it. Public education awareness. So we need to grow future farm managers out of our agricultural systems. And some of them are doing a great job of that, and then some of them have remained largely traditional. So we have just about every area that needs addressing and conversion. A shift in market barriers in terms of what's paid for certain kinds of crops, what kinds of crops are produced, so that, for example, as individuals, if we continue to buy products that are made from older processes or low nutrition foods, then we're not supporting the process that's going to get everybody to where we need to get for the healthy, nutritious food. Funding sources, financial support for transition, changes in land rental leases. You think of all this stuff. Land rental leases don't contemplate that somebody's going to come in and change it from type A process to type B process, how long that takes. And by the way, that adds value to the owner of the land. So, lots of stuff to think about. Increased funding for research projects. There's all kinds of programs that are available to farmers, and they are researched or voted upon or changed at certain times annually, every 5 years. Where we need to get ahead of those. We need to know what they are. We need to make sure that they are tilted in favor of regenerative methods, that they reward those more than the older methods, so that we get the healthy things that we're looking for. A few of those are listed here. So what can you do? Communicate, bridge controversy and shared interest. We need to educate ourselves and others. Don't believe me, go check everything out. When you go do that, by the way, beware. Don't just go scrolling the internet and believe every word that comes out there is truth and not intended to influence you. If you're reading something from the fertilizer industry, be aware of their bias, be aware of their likelihood to tell you why fertilizer is good. So go and understand who your sources are, read a variety of them. I make myself read things that are 180 out from my beliefs, so that I am educated about what people are thinking. I am giving it a fair read. I give it fair research, and I may come out with my mind changed. You never know. But isn't that the smart process? Don't we want to really get to the smart end, to the truth? So advocate for change and influence others. When you've gone through that process, and speak smartly. Please don't take snippets and just relay them on that may not be correct. Apply sustainable practices in your own life. There'll be lots of webinars coming up where we'll talk about all kinds of things where the central topic is sustainability for the planet. Vote every day with your dollars. Think about what you're buying in your food. Think about who you're buying it from. Sometimes, go and check out what they're doing. I saw there was a product that I had in my house, and I looked it up, and sure enough, it had palm oil, and I wrote them not too hard to do on the internet these days, just an email and said, I'm really concerned about this. What are you doing? And when they came back and they reported to me what they were doing, I realized that it was this tree for a tree concept of, we're going to make it look, I call it greenwashing, make it look like that one tree that we replaced, that little sapling, replaced this huge, several, decades old tree, and its roots in the soil and all of the environment that were destroyed when it was pulled out. We've got to be smart about this. So vote with your dollars, vote responsibly. We have an election coming up, and our lives may just depend on it and the future generations. I'm of an age where maybe I'll make it to 2050, who knows, but not much beyond that's for sure. But I look at the young ones around and I worry so for their future and what they're having to endure. Contact your representatives. I go out and I send an email and I know exactly, and by the way, there are websites, you find your representative, .com kind of things, where you can go out and find out who your senators are, who are your, by the way, states have senators, your local senators and legislators, your national, found out who the boards are and who's running your county, who's running your city, all those things, and have influence in them. Let them know what you care about and ask for their support. When you contact them, they get so few people, the silent majority, that when you speak to them, they think they're speaking to a whole lot more people that represent a need. So if you can get a few friends, now it really compounds, and they track the statistics by topic, literally, of how many contacts to get by topic, and they extrapolate that as to how representative that must be of the population. So you want to have an impact, boy, here's a tremendous way to do it. You think sending an email isn't powerful? Trust me, it's huge, just huge. So be part of the solution. If you want to contact us, and we'd love that, we're at webinar at soilfoodhealth.org. That's webinar at soilfoodhealth.org. You can go to soilfoodhealth.org, the website, sign up to receive notifications of future webinars, and we would love to have you there. We would love to have your input. Right now, for just a short period, I'm a member of a group that's called climatereality.org. I'm a climate reality leader, and at this time of year, there's 24 hours of reality. And if you get this and you respond fast enough, you can go out to 24hoursofreality.org, and they'll actually plant a tree for you where you say you want it planted, meaning the state, that kind of thing. That sequesters carbon, that builds a future. That's what we're all about. Healthy, nutritious soil, food, with a healthy farming community and profitable farming community ready to serve a growing world. So I'll take questions now if you have any. And thanks so very much. I really appreciate your attendance.